everybody. I'm Nathan Lynch from Apostolic Debate Podcast. And what you are about to see is the opening statement for a debate I was going to have a few weeks ago on Is the Bible Corrupted? However, that debate never happened. And so I decided to turn the actual opening statement into a mini lecture for you on YouTube. So sit back, grab a snack, and enjoy. Everyone's excited? Because I know I am. Okay. I think we're doing pretty good. How's everyone doing today? Okay. Today's question is, can we trust the Bible? Now, this is a loaded question because the Bible is not one book. The Bible is actually a compilation of 66 books, ranging from Genesis to Revelation. So it's really a mini ancient library of books. And this library of 66 books was written by about 40 different authors, starting with Moses with the Torah, or the Pentateuch, which is the first five books: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, all the way to John with the book of Revelation, 1895. This library was written across 3 different continents: Asia, Europe, and Africa. This library took around 1,500 years to complete, from around 1400 BC to AD 95. The Old Testament, our manuscripts of this, are the Masoretic text from AD 900 to AD 100, the Dead Sea Scrolls from around BC 200, the Septuagint from 300 to 100 BC. The Masoretic text was our main thing. The Dead Sea Scrolls, which were recently discovered in the Qumran cave in the Dead Sea by a shepherd. They contain what's called the Great Isaiah Scroll, which is the scroll of the full book of Isaiah. Then there's the Septuagint, which is what the apostles quoted, what Jesus himself quoted. Now, for the New Testament, because this is really what everyone talks about when they say, is the Bible corrupted? The New Testament, we have 20,000 to 25,000 plus manuscripts and fragments of the Old Testament. The most important of these, or the earliest of these, is what's called P52. Now, it is called P52 because of what it was on, right? The P stands for papyrus. Now, I know scholars are very, very creative, right? P for papyrus, 52, because it was the 52nd manuscript. Thus, P52, right? P52 ranges from around 8, we date it by paleographers, the date around 125 AD. Now, this means that P52 is written about 30 to 40 years after the Gospel of John. So this is either a copy of the original or a copy of the original. It's very early on. Then, and don't worry, I will show a picture of P52. Next is P66. Again, papyri, the 66th manuscript. It dates around AD 200. And it's a nearly complete codex of John. Codex is a Latin word. Codex means book. So it's a nearly complete book of the Gospel of John. Then there's P75, which is from the late 100s AD to the early 200s AD, which is a majority of the Gospel of Luke. Then there's the codices. Codice, like I already said, codex is a Latin word meaning book. Codices is the plural of codex. So the main ones are Codex Sinaiticus or Sinaiticus. It is often called the Sinai Bible. This Bible was written during from AD 330 to AD 360, and it is a full Bible, and it has extra books, as we'll cover later. Then there's Codex, and Sinaiticus, when it was discovered, was the king of the New Testament. This is where majority of our New Testament comes from, or where we translate from. when it was discovered all of our English Bibles translated their New Testament from Sinaiticus. Then there's Codex Vaticanus. We call it Vaticanus because it was found in the Vatican's library, in someone's drawer. Sinaiticus was found in a trash can. Vaticanus was found in a drawer, I believe. And it dates from around AD 300 to 325. Again, it's a full Bible, and now it is the base of all of our New Testament translations. The next is Codex Alexandrinus, AD 400 to AD 400, and it's a near full Bible. Now, these are not our only codexes. There's Codex Sinaiticus, Vaticanus, Alexandrinus, Washingtonianus, and Androgenus. And there's plethora of other codexes, but these are the earliest ones. Now, let's actually get into it. This is P52. It's about the size of a credit card, and it contains a few lines of the Gospel of John. So this is how we know that very, very early on, these Gospels were being transmitted and copied and pushed everywhere. Now, most people, even if they can read Greek, can't actually read this, because when this was written, they would just write in a straight line. There was no vowels, there was no punctuation, and it was just a straight line. So it would be nearly impossible. It was very difficult to read. Next is, Codex Sinaiticus. It's a full Bible, and it contains what's called the Apocrypha, or the Deuterocanonical books. Things like Baruch, Judith, First and Second Maccabees, the Book of Wisdom, and things like that. And it also contains some New Testament books, such as the Shepherd of Hermas and the Epistle of Barnabas. These are both very early books. Shepherd of Hermas being a oneness book. It's pretty oneness. Next is Codex Vaticanus, from AD 300 to AD 325. Again, it's a full Bible, and it's the basis of all New Testaments today, and, of course, second to that being Sinaiticus. Then, the favorite thing is the Church Fathers. Most people don't think about them, but nearly the entire New Testament can be reconstructed from quotations from them. Origen, we can construct nearly the entire New Testament just from him, and he lived from around AD 184 to AD 253. Then there's St. John Chrysostom, from AD 347 to 407, and Augustine of Hippo, from AD 354 to AD 430. In their sermons, they were very detailed and quoted the Old and New Testaments faithfully. And these guys aren't the only ones. There's Ignatius, Athanasius, all of the early church fathers, even some from the first century or from the second century. So from AD 100 to AD 200, they were quoting scripture, which is how we know that the Gospels were not corrupted, because their quotations of scripture is accurate to our Bibles. So even within a few years, like 20 to 30 years of these Gospels being written, people were already accepting them as scripture and quoting from them. Now, how many manuscripts do we have per century? From the second century, we have around 12 manuscripts, give or take. From the 3rd century, we have 64 manuscripts. From the 4th century, we have found 48 manuscripts. This is only what we found, by the way. So there's around 124 in total within 300 years of the composition of the New Testament. Now, majority of these are fragments. They're fragmentary. However, if you put them all together, the entire New Testament is found multiple times. Things like Sinaiticus and Vaticanus alone are 2 New Testaments by themselves. Now, here's a good question. How do the other writers stack up to this? If we're going to compare the same time period, which is about 300 years after the composition of their writings, the average classical writer just doesn't. They just cannot compare. The average classical Greek writer has less than 20 manuscripts in existence. If you stack up every single one of them, it's 4 feet high. But if you do the same with the New Testament, it's over a mile high compared to 4 feet. Let's actually go through and name some of these Greco-Roman writers and the earliest copies of them. These are some of the most important historians of the Greco-Roman period. Pliny the Elder. The earliest manuscripts are 700 years after Pliny. And majority of our information on Rome comes from Pliny the Elder. And we don't see actual substantial manuscripts until 700 years later. Plutarch, and of course we have a handful, like 1 or 2 manuscripts from before this time, but they don't really prove anything. Plutarch, same with Plutarch, 800 years. It took 800 years until we actually start seeing the writings of Plutarch. Josephus, one of, if not the most important, we don't see anything from him until 800 years later. Polybius, it takes 1,200 years. Pausanias, it takes 1,400 years. Herodotus, 1,500 years. And Xenophon, 1,800 years. Until we start seeing manuscripts of them, substantial manuscripts. To say the New Testament has been corrupted is to say that we have zero information of Rome. Now let's graph it out. Greek New Testament manuscripts through 900 Common Era. There are 3 times more New Testament manuscripts within the first 200 years than the average Greco-Roman author has in 2,000 years. This is the number of manuscripts, or this is the time. To say the Bible is not preserved is to say all ancient history is either false or we just cannot trust it. We would be thrust back into the Dark Ages. The New Testament is the greatest and most attested work of the ancient world. Because we have hundreds of thousands of variants, we can find the original wording. I'm being very purposeful with my writing here. What kind of variations exist? Now, when I say variations, I mean, if you take Codex Sinaiticus and Codex Vaticanus, right, our 2 earliest, if you go to a random verse, right, if you take some verses, sometimes they actually disagree with each other. They're not one-for-one copies, none of them are. We actually do have what's called textual variants, which are places where the manuscripts don't agree with each other. For example, 99% of all of them make no difference at all because their difference is in spelling. See what I did here? I was very purposeful. The most common variance is what's called the movable nu. A apple or an apple, right? It doesn't really matter. It doesn't change what's going on. The smallest and most important variants, which is less than 1% of all variants, are variants that could be the original. They're called original. They're variants that could be the original wording. For example, Revelations 13:8. Here is wisdom. Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. Right? Go ask any Christian, any Protestant, they're going to say 666 vehemently. Go and ask some random dude on the street, he's going to pull up his arm sleeve and show his 666 tattoo. However, only 2 manuscripts in existence say 616. The 2 manuscripts are very important manuscripts. Our earliest manuscript of the book of Revelations says 616. And the most complete manuscript of the book of Revelation says 616 as well. All the others say 666. This is an example of an important variation where either or could be the original wording. Now, it actually doesn't matter because 666 and 616 are Greek and Roman. If you take the numerological approach, it's just numerology for Emperor Nero. Now, do these textual variants matter? According to the most famous and most widely recognized atheistic New Testament scholar on earth, Bart Ehrman, who's the most famous, essential Christian beliefs are not affected by textual variants in the manuscript tradition of the New Testament. Bart Ehrman, misquoting Jesus. So according to the most famous and widely recognized scholar of the New Testament, with books like Misquoting Jesus and the Bible's Corruption, things like that. He's written over, I believe, 23 books on the Bible's corruption. Even he says, no, the doctrine isn't really affected by it. Now, a lot of people have said the New Testament manuscript tradition is like the telephone game. When I'll tell someone one thing, they'll go and tell the other person that the thing. They'll tell the other person, and it keeps going down until the last person. And the sentence has changed completely. I could have said McDonald's chicken nuggets, and they'll say Wendy's burger. right? Completely different sentence. The difference is our manuscript tradition is written. It's not oral. It's not someone said this and that was written. It was Mark, the earliest gospel, wrote his gospel. Then people would take his work and copy it. Then other people would take either the copy of the original or the original and copy it. Some people would copy the copy, or they would copy the copy of the copy, or they would copy the original. It would just keep spreading like wildfire. The sources of these copies was not just the last person in line, right? The author of Vaticanus did not just take Vaticanus version 1 and write Vaticanus version 2. He would take every manuscript he had and make his own manuscript. Then there's the patristic writers, things like the early church fathers, because these early church fathers would live during 100 and 300 AD. If they found a manuscript that contradicted other manuscripts, they would call it out. And other scribes would also call it out. And then there's the autographs, which are the originals. These guys were not copied once and then thrown in the garbage. They would be copied and copied and copied, then copied more, then copied even more. Then those copies would be copied and things like that. It was not a one-time deal. So, in summary, the Bible is not corrupted. Thank you.